We are back, and this time around we're looking to hit a topic back from Heaven's Field at a different angle. It comes from Big Bismarck. He says, I'm 90% sure that Kotomine purposely botched the surgery when reattaching Shirou's arm just to mess with him. And he even went on to say, I mean, seriously, this is the same person that gave Rin the knife that took out her own father, which is very true. I really like this train of thought because this is something that didn't cross my mind once as I was going through the story. And it's another reason why Kirei is such an interesting and dynamic character. Out of all the underhanded and cutthroat things that Kirei has done in the story, I truly don't believe this to be one of them. I do think that that was a genuine surgery. It's the same way how Shirou always called him a fake priest, which is very ironic because Kirei's devotion to religion is one of the most honest things about his character. I mean, even in the story itself, up until the time where he finally was about to face off against Shirou 1v1, and he knew he was going to lose his life in that fight for good, he carried that cross all the way to the end. He didn't rebuke the higher power. He didn't sully its name. He always stuck to that path because that's what his father instilled in him, and that's just something that he believed to be true. And the same thing goes for this surgery. While I do think that he may have found it beneficial to save Shirou, evidently, why else would he go out of his way? It comes across as he genuinely did his best in the process. And I'll give an example. In the Prisma Ilyaverse, when Shirou was going against Julian and it didn't work out and he ended up being mortally wounded, guess who was there to save him? Still Kirei. Even in the other verse. So that's somewhat of a constant. He had nothing to gain, he had nothing to lose from saving Shirou, especially in the Prisma timelines, yet he still did it anyway. He's not even involved with Shirou in those timelines, so he definitely had nothing to gain. So again, I feel like that's just one of those genuine things. But then look, to counter that notion, you also got times like when Karya was mortally wounded when he was fighting against Tokiomi, and Kirei healed him on purpose to bring him back into the war just because he knew how much turmoil that would cause. Or Kirei just working alongside Shirou in the 5th Grail War outright because he knew that would bring him closer to his goal. So I definitely can see why somebody would think that. The whole idea of the arm itself has always been an interesting concept, even revisiting the idea, because again, this predates pseudo servants, demi servants, any of that, and it turns a lot of the base principles on their head, which was really good for the entire route. It's one of those things that I wish we got to be a part of. You know, in the story, the way that it's framed, we see Shirou loses his arm, and then after the surgery, we see that he gained archers, but we never really see anything in between. We never get any insight on the actual process, what he did, how long he took, and there's a lot to take from that we just weren't involved in. It's just one of those many things that always stayed off screen. And to get a little more into the scene itself, he did say that it only worked because he was compatible with the arm, but it does make you wonder who else may or may have not been compatible with their own servants in terms of them having some type of surgery where they have to take a different portion of their body, or just trying it for the sake of doing so. Maybe Sakura gets Medusa's mystic eyes, or Brazette gets Cucullin's nose. Now I'm joking about that one, but maybe she gets his legs because he was stated to be the fastest servant in that war. Just any pair for that matter, it could work. And it's a lot like the class cards in a way. It's just that the cost is way higher, but the efficiency is better. You know, class cards are generally way weaker than actual heroic spirits, so it'd still be different. Not only that, but class cards aren't even accessible in the base worlds. That's only in the Ilyaverse. So you still be diving into new avenues. If you could find somebody that could get close to perfecting this, that would be a huge development, because then you don't have to rely on the servant themselves and work as a unit, and you can just take different parts of them that you want and go about the war that way. Of course, without all the extra defects. Something like that, of course, would would take years unless it was an actual genius, but we do have a lot of those in the Fate world, so I wouldn't be surprised at all. One thing that I find really impressive on its own that doesn't really get talked about is how successful Kirei was with his surgery, because he did say that as long as Shirou doesn't interact with the arm too heavily, which of course he ended up doing the complete opposite, he could have lived a normal life for a good portion of time. That's something that was directly addressed, and it just goes to show how astute being an executor is in the church and how precise they are with their teachings, because the very fact that he was able to do the surgery was because he was a part of the church. We don't even know if that was the most optimal that it can get, because Kirei isn't the best executor. He's just a really good executor, but it gets higher than him, and who's to say that those people couldn't perform those same surgeries but even better? I mean, you look at people like Hansa and the cybernetics that the church claims to have and how effective his surgery was, and that's something that I mentioned before. Who's doing these surgeries? Because the same person that gave Hansa his cyber arm probably could do the same with the servant. Honestly, it would make a lot of sense. Another thing that Kirei really dials in on when he's explaining what happened to Shirou is that he can't activate the arm because it's too much knowledge and too much magical energy for his time. Essentially, it's exactly like when Shirou got that crest from Ren temporarily in the UB dub route, and he was receiving things before he was supposed to, and that's the reason why his body and his mind was self-destructing, but it was never on that level. That's kind of a teaser for the Heaven's Field route. The same thing is happening, but it's 100 times worse. And while we're on the subject of transplants, it makes me think about transplanting a magic crest and how low the success rate is for those. It really speaks a lot about Kirei's ability. Something that's impressive for both Kirei and Shirou is that getting a transplant from Emiya specifically has to be one of the hardest ones out of any servant. Because you got to think about who Emiya actually is. All of those weapons, all of those battles that he's had as a counter guardian, it's no wonder why Shirou was hit with an onslaught of information instantly, and he had to focus his own energy as much as possible as soon as he got the arm, just to stop from blacking out. His surgery will be way harder than, say, someone like Mandricardo. And I love Mandricardo, that's not a dig at him, but there's just a lot less information to take in. And the same can be said about a bunch of servants. A lot of it really makes me think about Ergo from Case Files. There's just so much that goes into it and so much progress to be made that I feel like is being undermined. It also says that Shirou isn't the first person to undergo that process, because Kirei was confident enough to even give it a shot and knew exactly what to do without any help. Usually for something like that, you would have a whole team. It was literally just him. So who was that person that has already been attached to a servant? Or maybe he was basing it off of their use of cybernetics. But yeah, since getting this type of transplant, as Kirei says, is largely based around the quality of your circuits and how much information you know, it stands to reason that if you get somebody that's knowledgeable enough, if they have a good foundation, they could really make some things work out. He also brought up the fact that another reason that it worked is because Emiya was still anchored to the world. So the servant themselves still have to be present before they leave the world in order for the transplant to work. So you can't take a body part and then that servant dissipates. The body part is just going to dissipate along with them, even if you have the person on the table at that time. If it's even a second too late, you're just out of luck. You know, I specifically remember Medea having this authority over Sasaki, where if she wanted to, she could blow his entire chest open. Who's to say that you couldn't do the same with his body parts? We already know that his hands are capable of true magic level techniques. That's super valuable. Just something to think about.